Hello and welcome to another session of the Unity Project. Today we are going to be talking about the role of humility in how Christians build unity in our congregations. And I'm really excited to introduce to you our speaker, Dr. Derek Voorhees. I've gotten to know him over the past couple of years. He is the president of Boise Bible College. He's been president since 2017. Before that, he was a professor of New Testament at Boise Bible College. And before that, he had 23 years in ministry. So he brings to us the perspective of an educator, of somebody steeped in the New Testament, and of a pastor who's done years of ministry. And so I'm really excited for him to unpack this theme for us. I encourage you to have your Bibles open to Matthew 18 because he's going to take you through that chapter and show you how humility is an essential ingredient in Jesus's recipe for unity in the congregation. And I think it's going to blow you away just how he unpacks that. So I encourage you to be ready for that. Then we're going to hear a testimony from a missionary named Joni Morse from Thailand. And the first thing I want you to listen for is the birds. His testimony is recorded in Thailand, and you can hear the birds from the jungle in the background. But more so, I want you to listen to the story that Joni is going to tell, because it's a story of a group of missionaries who had an amazing opportunity to bring a community to Christ, and they experienced a setback, a hardship that they could have really responded to badly, but responding in humility, God used that humility to win a victory for his kingdom. It's a great story that I think you'll really enjoy. So it's time for us to have a conversation about humility.
Hi, I'm Derek Voorhees from Boise Bible College, and I'm really privileged to have the opportunity to participate in this year's Unity Project in this way. So here's what I'd like to try to do is I want to propose a thought. I'd like to look at Matthew 18 as a way to kind of support and explain this thought, and then wrap it up. So here's sort of my opening big idea: is unity is preserved and propelled by humility. Unity is preserved, protected, secured, and it's propelled and it's advanced by humility. Let me say it one more time. Unity is preserved and propelled by humility. So to Matthew 18, just to start our attention in verse 20. And then I want to move backwards into Matthew 18 up to the top. So if you'll follow my thinking there, I want to start in verse 20. Jesus has these famous words in the middle of Matthew 18 where he says, "For where 2 or 3 come together in my name, there I am with you." Where 2 or 3 in my name, I'm present with you. I think he's speaking about talking with him, praying to him, processing things with him. I'm with you. But I want to know where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name to talk about what with Jesus. So let's go back one verse to verse 19. Jesus said, "Again, I tell you that if 2 of you on earth agree about anything you ask for, it will be done for you by my Father in heaven." Oh, okay. So where 2 agree on earth about anything, but there's agreement, so there's got to have something that's narrowed that down to something that you're asking for. You're asking for it in Jesus' name, 2 or 3 huddled together. He says, "I'm with you as you ask for this." I want to know what this is. What is the thing that the Father will allow to be done? Well, let's go back a little further. Go a few more verses before verse 19. Go to verse 15. Here's the paragraph in the theme. "If your brother sins against you, go and show him his fault just between the 2 of you." So if a brother sins against you, wrongs you, more than offends you, but does something in a sinful way against you, then instead of waiting for that brother or that sister to come to you and to seek forgiveness, you go to them and you raise the fault with them just privately, the 2 of you. And Jesus says the motive. If he listens to you, you've won your brother over. So apparently there's something about preserving that brother, that sister, by approaching it, addressing the fault, not to shame them, but as a way to win them back, to make sure their heart is healthy and sound. But Jesus says in verse 16, if he will not listen to you one-on-one, privately about this, won't address the fault, the sin, then take 1 or 2 others along so that every matter may be established by the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. That's that Old Testament principle to validate it, so it's not a he said or she said. If he refuses in verse 17, If he refuses to listen to them, the 2 or 3 witnesses that you've brought, then tell it to the church. Broaden out the scope. Tell it to the community of God that brother, that sister, yourself, the 2 or 3 witnesses all are a part of. Bring it before the church, the community, the faith. And if he refuses to listen even to the church, treat him as you would a pagan or a tax collector. Interesting that Matthew, the tax collector, records this. Treat him as though you would a tax collector. That'd be somebody excluded from the covenant community, outside, someone who is not a part of the community, at least for a season, on a temporary basis. View them that way. So notice what Jesus says here. If someone wrongs you, go to them one-on-one. If that doesn't work, to restore them, to reunion them, to reconcile the situation, then bring 2 or 3 eventually to the church. And I think 19 and 20, those verses are about this theme, where 2 or 3 are gathered and agree on earth in my name, asking me for this. What's the this? That this brother, that this sister who's wronged you might have a softened heart, a repentant heart, might be restored back into the union of the fold. But I think this theme in this paragraph is prefaced with something before it. So let's back up a little bit further in Matthew 18 to verse 12. Jesus said this, what do you think? If a man owns 100 sheep and one of them wanders away, will he not leave the 99 on the hills and go to look for the one that wandered off? So 1 sheep out of 100 wanders. Jesus is saying, wouldn't that shepherd be more inclined to go find the one that's wandering? Yes, it's kind of risky to leave the 99 without a shepherd, but to go find the one that's wandering away. Jesus says that if he finds it, verse 13, if he finds it, I tell you the truth. He's happier about that 1 sheep than about the 99 that did not wander off. In the same way, your Father in heaven is not willing that any should be lost, that anyone should be lost, like that brother, like that sister, the one who is offended, caused a sin to happen, and you're seeking restoration, like a lost sheep, wandering. You're concerned. You treat that brother, that sister like a lost sheep, but there's a concern for that. So you're praying for a restoration, for a reunion, for a reuniting to take place. But Jesus says something there. I skipped over it intentionally in verse 14. If you look at it again, in the same way your Father in heaven is not willing that any of these little ones should be lost. Who are the little ones? Go back. Just a few more verses. Go back to verse 10. See that you do not look down, Jesus said, on one of these little ones. Oh, one of these, who are the little ones? Well, let's keep going back. And let's see if Jesus clarifies what he's referring to. So move back into the chapter from verse 12 and verse 10. Now let's go back to verse 5. Jesus said this, whoever welcomes a little child. Oh, there we go. One child. Are you seeing the singular pattern? One child, one lost sheep, one brother or sister that sinned against you. Verse 5, whoever welcomes a little child like this in my name welcomes me. But if anyone causes one of these little ones, maybe an adult, someone older than this little child, causes one of these little ones who believes in me to sin, it would be better for him, that person that caused that little one to sin, to have a large millstone hung around his neck and to be drowned in the depths of the sea. In Jesus' day, children were overlooked. They were marginalized. They were kind of set aside. They weren't that important. They didn't have a lot of money, a lot of clout yet, not a lot of influence or voice or political prowess. So they were valued as a life, but they were undervalued as any commodity for society. But Jesus said, don't view them that way. These children are important, especially don't cause them to sin. One child matters. One sheep matters. And I think Jesus is getting to what he's already said in verse 15. One brother matters. So where 2 or 3 are gathered to reunion with that brother. But I think this is set up by what is recorded before verse 5. So we need to back up a little bit further. That's a large theme in Matthew 18. Look at what Matthew records. The disciples are talking about something. Verse 1. Go to verse 1. At that time, the disciples came to Jesus and asked, who, that would be singular, one, are you seeing the pattern? Who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? Of the 12, they're like figuring out who has the highest rank, who's the most important, who would Jesus call on first, who's numero uno in the disciple ranking of the 12. And Matthew says in verse 2, he called a little child. Jesus called a child and said, and had him stand among them. And he said in verse 3, I tell you the truth, you 12, I tell you the truth, unless you change the way you view yourself in this ranking and in this authority and this power, unless you view yourself and become like a little child, like one of these children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. And to my point, verse 4, therefore, whoever humbles himself like this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. Whoever is willing to take the lowest rung on the ladder, not seeking for the top rung. Whoever is willing to become the least, not the greatest. Who's ever willing to become last, not the first. That's what's most important here. And if we take that attitude and that posture, then I think it's easier for us to think about a brother or a sister that's sinned against us and going to them, trying to restore and to reunion them back into the fold. But Jesus goes further. So we've been going backwards in Matthew 18. Go forward now. Look at verse 21. There's a man-made heading at verse 21. Kind of disregard that because Peter segues verse 20 and 21 together by his question. Look at what Peter asks in verse 21. Peter came to Jesus and asked, Lord, how many times shall I forgive my brother when he sins against me? I mean, I forgive him once, but it really hurt. He could sting me again. Should I let him do that? Should I forgive him so that he could abuse me again, sin against me again? Should I give him 7 opportunities? And Jesus said, in a way, is saying, oh, Peter, that's so liberal, that's so kind, you're so generous. But no, 7 times 70. And then Jesus takes that humility theme of one sheep and one child and one brother that you want to restore back into the fold to this parable, famous parable of a king. He owns so much, his dominance and rule is broad, but he has a servant that owes him a ginormous amount of money, more than his lifetime could make and pay back to the king. But the king, in his mercy, actually, I think, somewhat humbles himself and puts himself in the shoes of the servant and sees that there is no way for the servant to survive except if he forgives the debt. And he does. He forgives the debt of that servant. However, that servant doesn't do the same to one of his underling servants. That servant holds another servant to the fire and doesn't forgive the debt that he owes and puts him in prison. And that news gets back to the king. And the king is mad. He's upset. He's ticked that servant that he's forgiven so much would not do the same. And so the king punishes that wicked servant. And Jesus wraps up that parable in Matthew 18, verse 35 with these words. This is how my heavenly Father will treat each one of you, singular, unless you forgive your brother from your heart. Unity is preserved and propelled. It's advanced and it's protected by humility. And humility is seen in how well we mirror the character of that good king. How well we mirror the character of his mercy and his grace. Humility is visualized, it's shown, it's demonstrated, it's manifested. Humility is most showcased when we mirror and reflect the character of our King. That we don't seek to be great, but we seek to become less. Not first, but last. That humble posture, that is so core to unity. Let me say it one more time, this big idea. Unity is preserved and it is propelled by humility. In your family, you might consider what that looks like in your family to take a humble posture. In your church, unity is preserved and propelled in your church by humility. Churches with churches, where they find more commonality, a church striking a posture of humility, I think it creates opportunity for unity. In our nation, cross-culturally, humility is such an important trait for unity. It preserves it, and it protects it, and it propels it, and it advances unity. Consider those thoughts and see how it might be manifested best through your life this week and your church.
Hello, my name's Joni Morse. My wife Nangsar and I and our family are serving as missionaries in Thailand. Here's a story that may relate to humility. We had a fellow co-worker, a church planter, and his team working up in a village, and they spent months and months cultivating and teaching this headman about the Lord, and really brought him to the place of turning his life over to Christ and to be a Christ follower up in the village. And it was really amazing because here in Thailand, where you have a lot of like a group-oriented culture, when the leaders turn to the Lord, they bring along the entire village as well. So we were all very excited, and it came time to go up there and baptize the headman and his whole family. And the team had gone up there and spent the night there with them, went over everything. The whole teaching session went very well. They were very well received. And the next morning, which was a Sunday, they were all going to go down to the river and baptize the family. Well, come morning, just before breakfast, a thick cloud, a fog set into the village. I mean, they said you could hardly see 5 feet in front of you. Very unusual. From the ground up, the mountains, the trees were all shrouded in this thick fog. No one had ever seen anything like that. Well, immediately up in the headman's house, the local shaman was there and really chastising him, saying, "This is what I warned you about. As you forsake our ancestral ways and spirits, you're going to bring disaster on the whole community. We're all going to be wiped out. Crop failure, sickness, disease. You have to renounce this. Send these people back from where they came from." And the headman was at a loss for words too. The whole village didn't know what to do. So they go up to prepare for the baptism. And now the headman has changed his mind. He says, "You know what? I can't follow through with this. This is a very bad omen for our village. I will have to agree with the shaman and ask that you leave our community." Well, the whole team was just shattered. I mean, crestfallen. They had to go back to the house they were staying at, packed up their things, and some were leaving, already out on the road, some were out on the porch. And our co-worker friend, the church planter, decided to ask God about this. What has happened here? What is this great setback right now? And so as he was praying, he got the idea that, you know what? Clouds aren't a curse. Clouds are not a bad omen. Every time we hear about clouds in the Bible, you know, a cloud brought the Israelites out of Egypt, wandered through the desert all those wilderness years. It was a cloud that was leading them. When Jesus was up on the mountain of transfiguration, a cloud came down upon him. When Jesus returned to heaven, he was lifted up in a cloud. So he told his team to just stop where they were, ran back up to the chief and told him, "This is not a bad omen. This is a very auspicious occasion. The perfect day to have a baptism and the entire village come to the Lord." And as they were talking about this, the headman and the shaman were all there. The cloud lifted. They were on the verge of leaving the village when they went back and the cloud lifted. And they went down and followed through with the baptismal service. And as a result of that, not too long after that, the entire village followed the headman and they turned to the Lord. So we can experience humility and be humbled, eating humble pie, as it were. They didn't fight the situation. They submitted to whatever was being dished out at that morning. And if they had to leave, they had to leave. But it was a very humiliating situation for a tribal leader telling you to leave after you built up such a rapport with them. But God gave the victory. So being humble and being experiencing humility in our lives goes a long way to pave the way for success in our work.